You know, I'm going to start off this part of our program by sharing a conversation that I've had in literally every company that I've led and coached over the years. And I'm guessing it's a conversation that you also have had in your companies in one form or another. And that conversation goes like this. It starts with a request between a senior manager and an IT head. So let's imagine I'm the president of the company, and I turn to my IT manager and I say, you know, I'd like a report, and I'd like this report to be on our top 18 customers for the last 12 years, their sales revenue. Can you give me that report? And of course, the IT person says, sure, no problem. And I wait some time, and the report comes back. And then I look at that report, and as I study it, I think to myself, oh boy, this is good, but it's not quite what I want. So I turn to my IT manager and I say, you know, instead of the top 18, I need the bottom 18 as well. Can you do that? And of course, the IT manager says, sure, a little less enthusiastically this time, but the report comes back a little quicker this time, but it does come back. And I look at it, and as I look at the top 18 and the bottom 18, I realize, oh boy, you know, I don't have product information. What I really need are the top 3 products in addition to the 12 years, 18 top, 18 bottom. But at this point, my meeting's coming up, and so I'm not going to go back to IT because I know that they've got a lot on their plate. And so what do? I turn to my assistant, and I say to my assistant, can you give me an Excel spreadsheet, right, that gives me top 18, bottom 18 product information last 12 years? My assistant says, sure, I can do that. And a lot of us remember when we were thrilled because our assistant had this great tool called pivot tables, and also a great tool called Crystal Reports, right? We thought, boy, this is a great analytical tool. And sure enough, my assistant gives me that Excel spreadsheet and that report, and I go into my meeting with my VP of Operations and my VP of Sales with that report in my hand, and guess what they have in their hands? Their own Excel spreadsheet and their own report, right? And we spend the first half an hour of that meeting arguing about whose Excel spreadsheet is correct. And in the meantime, none of that Excel information is correct because the real information, the real data, is buried in our ERP system where it ought to be. And it's not the responsibility of the IT department to make sure that my information is correct, right? Their charge is making sure that the systems are in place, that we're running the business, that the data is secure and the data is correct. But there's a tension between needing our information to manage the business and make decisions and the mandate of IT. And I'm thrilled that we have today with us Chris Bushman from SurModics, because Chris is one of those IT managers who gets business, and he also gets IT. And he has solved that problem. And literally in the last 8 to 10 years, the technology has evolved to the point where we can bridge that gap between the needs of our data on the one hand and the integrity of that data and the requirements of management on the other side to get information out of that data and make their decisions. And Chris is one of those people who has gone a long way in solving that problem. And it is a journey. We heard from Daniel and from Marty about the future in big data, and quite honestly, it's a little overwhelming to all of us. And so it is a journey. And what Chris is going to do is describe his journey, because it starts with small steps that are still very meaningful. And then I'll come back and I'll talk about ways that we think you can be encouraged to move your journey on beyond to the predictive analytics and to big data. So Chris, excited to have you talk about the SurModics journey.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, the first two speakers, and Ken gave an introduction and said, we're talking about the future. I'm going to actually take us back to the present and then lay a little bit of a foundation for everyone in the room, because not a lot of people necessarily understand big data for sure, but also just to make sure everyone has the same basis of understanding of analytics and business intelligence. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on analytics, business intelligence, and then talk about SurModics' journey and where we've come to. And then Ken's going to lay out the future for you as he talks about big data and the future of where analytics is going. First, a brief introduction for the organization that I work for SurModics. Many people haven't heard of the company down here in the southwest corner of the metro in Eden Prairie. SurModics, probably the best thing to do is to give you an example of two different products that we make. How many have heard of the stent? Probably almost everyone in the room, right? The stent and then the drug-eluting stent. Well, I was up at Guidant for 21 years. Guidant, Abbott, Boston Scientific, a lot of different companies, J&J included, were looking at how do you take a stent, and for those who don't know, stent, angioplasty procedure, right? A balloon into the artery, expands the plaque against the artery to open up that artery. The stent keeps that open, but then we're having restenosis or reclosing of the artery. Put a drug on that in order to keep that open over time. These big companies couldn't figure it out. J&J came to SurModics and said, what kind of drug and what combination do you put on that will open arteries and keep that artery open? That's what SurModics figured out. So that's the type of things that SurModics does. We partnered over the last year and a half with IQ Decisions in order to roll out the analytics tools that you're going to see today, and hopefully looking forward into the future on what we're going to be rolling out as we go over the next couple of years. This really is a journey. How many people have worked on analytics projects or business intelligence at your organization or past one? How many of you are happy with the business intelligence? Even less than the 1 in 5 of companies satisfied here, courtesy of Accenture. There are a lot of analytics projects. We have a new CEO as of a couple years ago, and he came from the world that was using a look at data warehouses and data cubes, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and got to a result that wasn't very beneficial for them. The 21 years up at Guidant, we didn't get very far as where things are at today. In the last 7 years, really things have transformed quite a bit. So let me talk about the stages of analytics and where analytics is going. So first of all, I'll start with pre-analytics or reporting. That was kind of the introduction that Ken gave. And we go back to the time where we're pulling static reports out of systems. We're using Excel spreadsheets. We're using Access databases to do reporting, maybe getting into a little bit bigger databases like Oracle. But that's the background. You have a flattened report. You're able to bring that report in, and that's the first comparisons that people did. Then you get into the analytics early stages, where it's data warehousing, cubes, linear predefined reporting paths. And I'm going to talk about that in a second so you can understand a little bit more of how analytics had to work and the world that Ken described as well. That's why there were multiple versions of the truth and multiple versions of data. Then the next stage, today's analytics. Now you'll see a difference here. There's a check mark in the first one. That's where SurModics was 2 years ago. We actually skipped past the analytics early stages, and that's the opportunity that everybody in this room has, is to do the exact same thing and jump forward to the user-driven analytics. So it's no longer in the hands of the IT organization and IT department. Ken had mentioned that I have business and an IT background. I've been in human resources, mergers and acquisitions, engineering, R&D. So I understand the business and what the business areas need, as well as understanding IT. And they really need it to be user-driven, so the user can go in and say, here's how I want to look at the data, not I want to look at the data the way IT's programmed it for me to take a look at. This diagram actually gives you an idea of that. On the left-hand side is traditional BI. So you start off with a region, you drill into a state. So now we're in the Midwest, now we're in Minnesota. I look at a particular product, and then I look down to a salesperson. If I want to look at another salesperson, I have to drill up in that chain, back to product, and then drill down to the next salesperson. But now I want to look at what other states does that salesperson have sales in. I'm not able to do that in the traditional BI model, which existed until the last several years. I'd have to drill back up in the report, up to a new region, And then I'm starting to compile data and type it out of all these reports into an Excel sheet so I can go into the meeting Ken talked about and argue whose data is correct. The new world and where things are going, ClickView is one of those products, but there's quite a few others as well too, is business discovery. Once I've identified a salesperson, I can look and say, what states does that salesperson sell and what products do they sell? How have they performed against their plan? How have they performed against last year? And I have a lot of flexibility. It gives me the ability to look and answer questions that I didn't even know I had. And that's what SurModics really figured out over the course of our journey. In regards to then the next stages of analytics, this isn't where SurModics is at yet, but where SurModics is going is looking at big data and looking at prescriptive analytics. So let me frame that as well into a paradigm for you. So the objectives of the workforce are changing. We're looking hindsight into insight and then into foresight. You look from descriptive analytics to diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. All of those terms have been introduced today by the earlier speakers. Well, what do those really mean? If you take a look at it, you say, what happened? So I'm looking back at the past. What happened? You look then, why did that happen? Now you're getting into more of the present, what will happen? So based on the past data, I'm looking into the future, predictive analytics, what will happen? And the most important thing then is how can we make it happen? That's taking these vast volumes of data, analyzing them, pulling them together, not just from an individual company, but now from competitors, peers. This is business data, and what Ken's going to talk a lot about is medical data. And how do we take that, and how do we actually turn it into something real? So real brief on SurModics' journey, I'm going to give a little demonstration of the tool we put together as well. Phase 1, replace the manual reporting. We had what we called a flash report. It was generated in about 2 or 3 hours every week by the finance department. It was sent out in Excel. It was a manual report that's generated out of a 66,000-row spreadsheet. We found out what the limitations of Excel are when we're doing this, because there are limitations in Excel, even though it's now can accommodate a little bit of big data. We called that application Insight Revenue. And we took that historical data, the 66,000-row spreadsheet, because that was Spot. That's not our presenter there on the bottom left corner. That's the single version of the truth. That was our single version of the truth, the 66,000-row spreadsheet. We did pivot tables. We extracted data from it. We then had different people extracting the data and comparing it in those meetings, and they weren't able to come to the same conclusions because even though we started with a single version of the truth, by the time they manipulated it and sorted it out and filtered it, you now had multiple versions of the truth. Then we supplemented it with real-time data from our current ERP system. So now you have up-to-date information about what's happening in the organization. This is our executive snapshot. It gives you the ability to take a look at different time frames, and you can break it down here on the lower right corner as to what the percentages were for each of the different revenue types that we have in the organization. You then have the ability, as we mentioned before, to associate data. Pretty easy way to click in, look at data, and search data. You can also then look in and say, how do we break down the data, what types? So we're able to drill down and see different data. Then you're able to look and see over time. How did we do over time? On a quarter-by-quarter basis, are there any quarter-by-quarter trends? How do we compare to last year? Those are all different ways you can look at the data. That's pretty basic ClickView analytics tools that you're able to take a look at and view. Then we said we really want to enhance the reporting. That first look was for the finance department who said, can we do that? We actually released that application in 3 months with all the capabilities I showed you and quite a bit more that I've pulled out for purposes of the demonstration today. So then we got into enhanced reporting. We said the sales group now wants to take a look and say, how's our performance? Red, yellow, green, quick glance at things. How are customers doing against last year? Look at geography and how are we doing across geographies. And then a customer and product sales analysis. What Ken mentioned, those top 20 customers or the bottom 20 customers. The top 5, how have they done over time? What about for this different product type? So then, in addition to it, we included forecasting in this. That's something that is not quite on the bleeding edge. A couple years ago, we started to be able to enter data into the analytics tools and then use that data to compare to the analytics to say, how are you doing in comparison to forecast? How are you doing in comparison to outcomes as you start looking at the medical outcomes. The additional capability I mentioned as well too then is getting into forecasting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken to talk about big data and back into the future now.
Okay, so big data. Marty talked a little bit about the definition of big data. For a lot of us, it's a very confusing term. And thinking about coming this morning, I was excited to be here, and then I thought, boy, I'm going to be in front of a room of people who are probably a lot smarter than I am, talking about a topic that is eminently confusing, and following a discussion about Watson that's probably got more information than any of us could ever even begin to get our arms around. So it is a daunting task to get into this whole world of big data. So let's just talk about it a little bit. First, a couple of examples. The two that we put up there, one is from Amazon, one is from Boston's Beth Israel. And, you know, they're great examples of big data and how it's being used today in real time. Forgetting about the future, what's going on with big data right now? And in the example of Beth Israel there, you know, what they were able to do is give caregivers access to 200 million data points from about 2 million patients. And what they were able to do then is to adapt their delivery to the experience of those patients. So it wasn't just taking 100 or 150. Can you imagine the power of taking the data from 2 million data points from 2 million people? It's just, it boggles the mind when you think about having access to that kind of information in real time. And for Chris at SurModics, they're able to do that kind of analysis that they need for their business decisions in real time. So that's the business application. But in the medical field and in retail especially, there are some powerful examples even today. So what does the term big data mean? Marty talked about this a little bit. Let me just go through that definition again, the volumes of data. So when you think about big data, it does include orders of magnitude more data just in terms of the amount of information that comes through now. And the velocity, how quickly we're getting that data, that we get it in real time on an ongoing basis. The next is the variety. It's both structured and unstructured. It used to be that we'd think about data in a pre-prescribed format. Now, when you think about big data, it comes in a whole variety of sources: text, voice, video, sense data. And finally, the last point that Marty also mentioned is the veracity, because a lot of that data is messy and not trustworthy. So the question is, how can you filter out and how can you apply algorithms such that you can begin to trust the data? And I think the question that the reporter asked in the back is right on target. You know, when he said, you know, what happens when a physician, in his or her opinion, chooses an option that maybe wasn't even in Watson's 5. And I think there is a substantive difference because that data is out there available for everybody to see. You know, in the old days when Marty was talking about, you know, pulling those articles, the articles that librarian didn't give him, nobody really knew about them. Now everybody knows about it. So that data is out there and it's present, and I think that does present a real dilemma for people. Okay, so why big data? Well, you know, big data is simply here. It's not like somebody decided a while ago, boy, we need to create big data. Big data almost has a life of its own. And for most of us, it's out there in the future somewhere. But it's going to come, and it's like a tsunami. There's no question about if, just when, and you'll either be creating it or using it or both. And today it's for the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Yahoos. We talk about, you know, Daniel talked about the future stuff that startups and other companies are working on. But, you know, what strikes me is that, remember when a website was just an interesting option? That wasn't very far along when people decided, well, I guess we ought to have a website because a lot of people were doing it. And now you need it, obviously you need a website to be in business. So the key target areas, we listed here a number of those for you. to be thinking about, because what I'd like to do is bridge the gap between where you might be now and where you can go in the future. So these are 6 areas that you need to think about for your business. And I'm just going to touch on one, and that's the second one up there, the consumerization. It used to be that they could monitor a heart with a pacemaker by taking a device and putting it over the heart, and that connected to a modem, and that modem then communicated with a computer, and that computer may have printed out a report that the physician got. Right? Well, imagine that if you were the manufacturer of that device that measured the heart, what was going on in the heart, and that conveyed through the modem back to the printer. Now today, they can take an iPhone and put it up to your heart and transmit in real time. So what happened to that manufacturer of the device that measured it, right? So that's an example of consumerization, that there are going to be devices out there that are in the hands of the consumer that can do perhaps what your products can do today, and it can do it faster and better and probably more cheaply. And the bottom one there, that the electronic health records, that's a reality, mandated in, I think it's 2015. And so now, instead of conveying that information and the data is printed out for the doctor, now that data will go immediately into an EHR for that doctor to have access to immediately. So those are that little checklist we'd like for you to take away and think about. What are the target areas that might apply to my business as you think ahead to big data? So the business benefits, another checklist for you to think about. The outcome benefits, number third one, using process data from a medical device to directly benefit physicians, patients, or caregivers. Incredible opportunities there because of the mandate of EHRs. And then the last one, the operational efficiency, pretty straightforward for most of you in this room. Right? How can you make your operations more efficient by the use of big data? Walmart now requires that every single pallet that comes into a Walmart facility has to have an RFI tag, or they get penalized. And so all of a sudden the mandate is, if you're going to do business with Walmart, you've got to adapt that technology. Another example of an application of big data right now. So the key, the message for us today is that wherever you are in your journey, be it where SurModics is and has come from, there's benefits that you can reap right now with the technology that's available. And the heads up is that you can use that technology then to map your path for the future. So if you think about where you might go, what your next steps are, some suggestions. The first one is educate. So you think about, in the bottom there, what's your current analytics? What are you getting? What kind of return are you getting on your current analytics? Where are you in terms of the SurModics journey? Because what SurModics has done is immediately available to everybody. Where is big data being used currently in my business to look out and to educate yourself around that? What partners might be out there for you to incorporate in your business by looking at your competitors? Who are they using? What are the resources available? The next one is to explore possibilities. What are some key benefits you might get? What are some key target areas? And where are you now? How do you assess your strengths and weaknesses in terms of analytics today? And third, to engage, to do a pilot, to bite something off. It seems a little daunting, but there are great resources in the room. That's why Joe puts together this group. There are great resources in terms of your colleagues that you can learn from them about what they're doing, and to validate those goals and to measure the ROI on what you're doing. And finally, to execute, to refine and to put into process. It is a process, and it's an iterative process. So you can start with wherever you are now with available tools, measure that, and then move forward. So our message is not to be daunted by this whole notion of big data, and not to feel like it's way out there and I don't have to worry about it. You do have to worry about it, but you can do it in incremental steps.
Thanks very much for bringing this up. in academic circles as well as within our firm, 600 engineers and scientists. You can imagine how fun that can get. We're having a big discussion about what is, with limited resources, what is most important in big data, to attack the volume or to attack the ability to integrate multi-data, multi-types of data. I know that they both have to be done, but with limited resources, do we work on finding a way to getting the different types of data collated and working together, or to work on the volume and the speed?
Well, Chris may have an opinion on this. My own thought is that it's almost neither. To me, it's the integrity of the data that's key. So that probably leans more toward the integration of the data. Because as we work with companies, it's messy data out there. And forget about that veracity of big data. You just need to make sure you've got your data in your company now that's clean, that everybody trusts. So I'd almost tackle the integrity. Chris, any?
The comment I'd make to give you an idea of where we're going into the future is we do a lot of scientific research. So we have thousands and thousands, getting to millions of data points and images. That was brought up in a couple of questions earlier as well too. And one of the biggest things that we're trying to do is we're actually taking the second piece of what you said, which is that integration of the data, trying to figure out all the different sources and bringing that together. And then by bringing it together, what are the patterns that emerge from that? And then what questions are we able to ask and then get answered in relation to it as well?
Vaughn.
Are the products available, are they essentially open source? Can you load any data into any field and then bring it up and analyze it in a specific way? I don't know if that makes sense, but if I've got, millions of data points and I want to draw a line through it, can I draw the line any direction?
Yes. The short answer now is yes. That you can access. In our system, we're source agnostic, ERP agnostic, and the answer is, with the technology changes in the last 10 years, you can draw that line and redraw it and redraw it.
One of the great advantages of the tools today, ClickView is one of them, but as the other tools too, is you can actually download most of those for free. ClickView admits that they hook you on it like a drug. They actually let you use it for free on an individual basis, but the moment I want to share it with Ken or anyone else in the room, then I need to start buying licenses. And licenses aren't that expensive either. But you can actually download ClickView, Tableau, some of the other tools, and actually hook them up to your databases, take a look at the data, and start seeing the different patterns in that data for free on your desktop with the full functionality of the tool. And then as you see the value for your business, that actually leads to more and more capabilities as you go forward.
Great. And we have time for one more question.
Hi, quick question on some of the public data available through FDA. There's a lot of databases, there's a lot of vocabulary and resources that are publicly available. Has your tool or anyone thought about pulling some of that data down and looking for interactions and other type of meaningful data, some data mining that could be done?
Actually, I can take that. ClickView is a pretty extensive tool. I actually sit on the board of a company that we're looking at electronic health records and how do you take the electronic health record data and what's stored out in the public domain. So you can actually attach to websites, you can attach to data stored on those websites. There are some applications out there for those of you who are golfers in the or out in the audience here, that you can hop on and look at all of the results from all of the golf tournaments over the course of the last 25 years into a ClickView application that's built out there. That gives you an idea of it's searching multiple databases and multiple different sources to pull that information together. And if you want to see an individual golfer, you click on that one and see what's happening. We'll apply that to the medical world. If you want to see cancer and what data is out there available for cancer, cardiac conditions, all of those, the sources are pretty much agnostic, and almost all of these tools do hook up to all the databases.
Ken Rittersbach, Christopher Bushman, thank you very, very much for joining us today.